Yo, what is up guys? Delboy here, aka Blue Collar Sports TV. Hopefully you guys are doing well. If you're new here, smash that like, hit subscribe, all of that good stuff. So this video is a quick prediction for Daniel Dubois versus Joseph Parker. IBF heavyweight world title fight, going down on the undercard of Artur Beterbiev and Dmitry Bivol on the 22nd of February in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. A battle between two top 10 consensus heavyweights, and a fight that should be relatively interesting. Of course, Dubois is the IBF champion. Outside of Alexander Usyk, he has been the former heavyweight. You know, you look at his last three fights: a win over Jarrell Miller, a stoppage win over Hrgovic, and that incredible knockout win over Anthony Joshua. The last year for Dubois has been incredibly fruitful. It seems like he's improving as a fighter mentally. I think he's the most confident he's ever been. And he's on a hot streak right now, looking very dangerous. Joseph Parker, well, he's resurrected his career in the last couple of years. Of course, he lost to Joe Joyce back in September of 2022. He got stopped in that fight, the first stoppage loss of Joe Parker's career. Fought a good fight that night, you know, put up a really good showing, but was just outgunned and overwhelmed by Joe Joyce. And at that point in time, I think many people never really envisaged Joseph Parker climbing to the top of a mountain again. But here he is. What a difference just over 2 years makes. Parker going into this fight with a 5-fight win streak. Notably, though, in his last two fights, he defeated Zhili Zhang. Some people felt Zhang won that fight. I felt Parker won it, personally. I felt he outworked Zhang. And the fight before that, he obviously beat Deontay Wilder by a lopsided, unanimous decision. Both fights, you know, people were picking Parker to lose, by the way. So he's upset the apple cart twice now in a row. And he's got nothing to lose here. You know, we didn't expect Parker to be back in this position a couple of years ago. So, you know, he's earned his shot as far as I'm concerned. I have to say, what I am worried about, though, is Joseph Parker going to revert to type? And what I mean by that is, many times in Parker's career, he's been accused of, you know, being boring, but sometimes not doing enough in certain fights. I think the Joshua fight's a great example. The Dillian Whyte fight is another example. He was a little unlucky in that fight because one of the knockdowns he suffered was bogus. But you saw what happened when he switched on against Dillian Whyte. He started to hurt Dillian Whyte and dropped him in round 12, but left it too late. You know, Parker's got this kind of reputation of sometimes boxing within himself. You know, not really rustling too many feathers. The first Chisora fight is another example of that. You know, made that fight way too close, way closer than it should have been. And even in the second Chisora fight, where he did actually right some of his wrongs, he was a lot more authoritative, but I still feel he could have done more. You know, I think Chisora was there to be knocked out that night, quite frankly. So is Parker gonna turn up and really let it hang? You know, really roll the dice and make the most of this opportunity? That is one thing I'm worried about. I hope he does. Because if he does, Parker does have good attributes for a heavyweight that a lot of heavyweights don't have. He's got pretty quick hands, pretty quick feet. He's got a pretty good chin for a heavyweight as well. Okay power, decent enough boxing skills, Joseph Parker. He does everything pretty well to a degree. Not the greatest on the inside, but you know, he's got a lot of attributes going for him, and he's a good athlete, and he needs to make the most of that against Daniel Dubois. I don't think Joseph Parker boxing on the back foot and being safety first necessarily is going to lead him to win this fight. I think we need to see a version of Joseph Parker that is more aggressive, or not necessarily aggressive in the sense of like pressuring. I don't mean front foot pressure, I mean aggressive in the sense of we need to see a Parker who's willing to hold his feet a little bit in this fight, who's willing to punch with Dubois, because I do think he has the hand speed advantage in this bout. Dubois is not necessarily slow with his hands, but I think Parker might be a bit quicker, and I think at times in this fight, Parker will have to punch with Dubois. He needs to get the respect of Daniel Dubois in this bout. He needs to be firing that authoritative jab, try to hold center ring, and fire the straight right hand behind it. We saw how much success Hrgović was having against Dubois with that looping overhand. Every time he threw that shot, he was tagging Dubois, but he just couldn't hurt Dubois. Parker, this might be controversial, but I think if Parker puts when Parker sits down on his shots, I actually think Parker might hit harder than Hrgović. I know that may sound crazy, but Hrgović has such poor punch technique. I think his power as a pro has been drastically overrated. Whereas I think Parker's a lot more technically correct than Hrgović with the way he throws punches, particularly like the straight punches. I think he's more technically correct than Hrgović, and he's faster as well. So who knows, man? Maybe Parker, if he actually sets his mind, can get the respect of Dubois and maybe can hurt him. You know, I mean, Kevin Lerena was able to hurt Dubois, for example. I know Dubois' leg apparently was bad in that fight, but he was feeling those shots because, you know, Lerena was quick and pretty explosive with his work that night. So we need to see Parker hold his feet. We need to see Parker really, really box behind that authoritative jab. We need to see him throw straights behind it. And then in certain instances, you know, because Dubois is going to come on, he is going to pressure, there's going to be times in this fight where Parker needs to throw with Dubois. It's just that simple. He needs to exchange with Dubois and try to take advantage of his hand speed. Because I do think he's got the hand speed advantage, like I said. Parker, for me, can't be back foot bitching in this fight. He can't be fighting on the back foot and flicking out a jab, you know, a get off me jab, and throwing one right hand every minute. He can't be doing that in this fight because Dubois is just going to walk him down. I think Dubois' front foot game has got a lot better to a degree. It seems that he's quickened his feet up. The jab coming forwards is a major weapon for Dubois. He really steps into that jab and can really close the distance quickly with it. And if Parker is fighting negatively and he's flicking that jab, boxing on the back foot, I could still see him losing a jab battle with Dubois, despite Dubois coming forwards, because Dubois' jab is a lot more heavy. He steps into it. I could see Dubois winning the jab battle if Parker's too negative, and I could see Dubois winning the jab battle in the fight. You know, I've heard a lot of people's take on this fight so far, and I think most people are saying that Parker should box. I don't think he should. When I think of Parker boxing, I think of like the Stinkinator performances, you know, where he's not really doing much of anything. He's just flicking the jab. He's very passive. He's just doing enough maybe to win some rounds. I don't think that version of Parker beats Dubois, quite frankly. I think Dubois cuts the ring too quickly. I think he's too powerful. I think he's too aggressive. I think he's too confident. Right now, you need to get Dubois' respect. That means letting your nuts hang. That means holding your feet. That means, at times, exchanging with Dubois, but primarily boxing behind a hard jab and a hard straight right hand. Dubois, his style does have holes in it. He's a very aggressive dude, but he does come in quite square. His head is on center line. You know, Dubois barely moves his head, and I don't think his guard is the greatest, to be honest with you. I think Dubois' guard is pretty porous, holds his hands a little too far apart in my opinion. Defensively, there's holes in Dubois' game, but if Parker is back foot boxing, aka being negative, then he's not going to be able to take advantage of those holes, in my opinion. I disagree with those saying that Parker should try and make this a boxing match. I think Parker needs to be a boxer puncher in this one. Quite frankly, I think he needs to hurt Dubois. I really do. Because let's be real, yeah, even if Parker does back foot bitch shit, he makes it awkward, and maybe some people think he won 7 rounds to 5. Is he going to get the decision against Dubois? You know, who is probably, outside of Fury, Joshua and Usyk, the biggest name in the heavyweight division right now. I don't think he's going to get the decision, to be honest with you. So, yeah, Parker in this fight has to show us something different. He has to, again, let his nuts hang is the best way I'd put it. As for Dubois, I guess, it depends what Parker shows up, but the Parker that usually shows up to these fights is a guy who, in my opinion, is too negative. Aside from the Joe Joyce fight, he really, gave it his all that night. But if it's the negative Joe Parker, then I don't think Dubois really has to change much from the last couple of performances. Because quite frankly, I think that type of pressure will be enough to win the majority of rounds. Especially when you consider that hard jab, the work rate. I would just see Parker losing rounds based on activity, based on being negative. Whereas, Dubois is consistent with what he does, and he's shown us that he can do that for several rounds. Going 10 rounds with what's his face, Jarrell Miller, maintaining a good work rate throughout that fight. Went 8 rounds with Hrgovic, maintained a good work rate throughout that fight. If you're not going to give a Dubois a reason to slow down, he's not going to slow down. So, yeah, if Parker comes out negative and cautious, he'll lose the majority of rounds, in my opinion. The only thing I'd say for Dubois, even if that is the case, Parker can still be explosive with one shot. He still does have quick hands. So Dubois defensively, I do think needs to tighten up. In his last sort of 3 fights, he has shipped a fair few shots. Not so much against Miller, but against Hrgovic and even Joshua to a lesser degree. Those right hands were landing pretty regularly. In fact, before he knocked out Joshua, he was caught himself by a really big right hand. So he needs to watch out for those sort of things against Parker, who could deliver that sort of one punch, that quick one punch, that who knows could turn the fight. Dubois, one thing about Dubois, he is always open for that sort of shot. He could be dominating a fight, but defensively, he leaves the openings to let his opponents back into fights. So in this one, I would like to see Dubois pay a little more attention to defense. I appreciate Dubois is never going to be a guy who gives us Mike Tyson head movement, but I think he could do some basic things, like, for example, just hold a better guard for a start. Sometimes Dubois is guilty of reaching in with punches, particularly his overhand right. Things like that. Sometimes he punches from a little too far out, which could leave openings for counters. Just little things like that with Dubois could make his defense a lot better. Just basic things, So I want to see that improvement from Dubois in this bout. I want to see more attention paid to defense. I still want to see the aggression. I still want to see him putting his shots together. But, just be a little cautious as you're coming in, as you're applying that pressure. Guard, a slight better understanding of distance and when to throw the overhand right in particular. Just a little more cerebral with the offense, and in turn, that will improve his defense. Because, again, one thing about Dubois, he's done really well in his last sort of 3 fights, but the openings have been there. That's all I will say. But I look at this fight, listen, I want to see Parker really come out and treat this fight like it's his last shot at the big time, because that's how he should treat it. If it's another Stinkinator performance, is he going to get on these sort of cards again? Probably not. So he needs to let it all hang out. And for me, it's on Parker to make this fight. If this fight is boring, more than likely, 99% likely, it's going to be down to Parker. And if it's a boring fight, he's lost the fight, in my opinion. Yeah, maybe he can survive doing that, but I don't think he's winning the fight doing that. I think he needs to be more authoritative in this one. I think he basically needs to be a boxer-puncher primarily, but also with counter-punching as well. That should be his role in this fight. But is that going to happen? I can't count on it because, Parker, again, sometimes leaves a lot to be desired in these big fights. But anyway, my official prediction, my official pick, I'm going to go with Daniel Dubois. I think that's the safe pick here. And I'm going to go with Dubois on points. Unfortunately, I think Parker might be negative here and kind of fight to survive. Maybe show a little bit in the early rounds, but I think as the fight plays out, he's probably going to go in his shell, throw less punches, a bit of clinching, a bit of moving, and I think you'll see maybe a lackluster fight, and I think Dubois wins on points. But anyway, share your thoughts below. Beanie Guy Del Boy. Peace.